Hello everybody and welcome back to more political chatter. In this video we will be talking about my updated 2024 US Senate predictions. This has really changed a lot since my Senate predictions last month. I do them every month, so make sure to watch them every month. I do Senate and presidential election predictions every single month to see how it changes, month by month until election day. But this is really a big change in really one state, the state of Montana, from my prediction back in March. And it makes the state of the control of the U.S. Senate a lot more interesting. And it really does depend on who wins the presidential race. So, with that being said, let's get into this 2024 U.S. Senate predictions. So, as always, let's start with our safe Democratic states. So, safe states are states that will be decided by a 15% margin or more for their respective party. That will be Maria Cantwell. She will win re-election in Washington. Adam Schiff probably does beat Steve Garvey by a safe margin in California, though I don't know. I don't think that could possibly be likely. We have Mazie Hirono in the state of Hawaii. She wins re-election. We have Kirsten Gillibrand in New York. We have Amy Klobuchar in Minnesota, even though this will definitely not be safe. In the presidential election, Amy Klobuchar is a very, very, very strong candidate. Maryland, oh no, sorry, not Maryland. I'm so used to characterizing Maryland as safe, but that is actually a very interesting race this time around. I don't even. Oh, it's Lisa Blunt Rochester will be the junior senator if she does win. In Delaware, Andy Kim is now the Democratic nominee for Senate. He is a very strong candidate. He will win by a safe margin. We have Chris Murphy in Connecticut. We have Sheldon Whitehouse in Rhode Island. We have Elizabeth Warren in Massachusetts. And then we have two independents who caucus with the Democrats, so we'll just label them as Democrats, that being Bernie Sanders and Angus King in Vermont and Maine, respectively, both of whom will win by a safe margin, so 15% or more. As for the Republicans, they also have safe races, that being whoever replaces Mitt Romney as the Republican nominee for Senate in Utah. It could be quite a few people. This Republican primary for Senate is looking like a very close race. We have John Curtis, who I actually think it'll be, who is a U.S. representative from Utah, who I think will be the Republican nominee. We have John Barrasso in Wyoming. He will win re-election. It's John Hoeven in North Dakota who will win re-election. And then I actually do not think that the normal Nebraska Senate election will be safe for Republicans, which is a big change from what we typically see in Nebraska elections. But I do think that their special election, Pete Ricketts, the former governor, will win his first full term by a safe margin. We have Marsha Blackburn in Tennessee. She'll win by a safe margin. Roger Wicker in the state of Mississippi. Indiana, we have Jim Banks, who will win his first term. And then we come to the state of West Virginia, which I think is safe for the Republicans. But that is very, very significant because West Virginia is currently a Democratic seat. So this is a flip, and not only is it a narrow, small flip win for the Republicans, no, I believe that they will win by more than 15%, a lot more than 15%, because the Democrat representing the seat, Joe Manchin, is not running again. He is retiring, and the Democrats don't really have anyone strong to put up, anyone that could possibly win or even make this race anywhere close. So Jim Justice is the Republican nominee for this Senate seat, and he is actually the current governor who's retiring next year because he will be elected senator. And he is a very popular governor and a very strong candidate. So West Virginia will go safe Republican. Before we move on to likely states, Republicans are at 56 seats, Democrats at 40, so 51 seats are needed for majority, or, and this is very critical and we'll get to why, or you need 50 seats plus the vice presidency. the vice president will cast the tie-breaking vote in a 50-50 scenario. So that will be very important later on. So for an outright majority of 51 seats, Republicans need 5 more seats, Democrats need 11. So as you can see, Democrats are at a clear disadvantage. This 2024 map is really harder for them than the Republicans. So now moving on to likely states. So these states, we generally do know how they're going to go, but these states will be decided by a 5 to 15% margin. So quite a bit closer than the safe characterization. So starting with the Democrats, of course, Martin Heinrich in New Mexico, I don't think it can possibly win quite by a safe margin. Looking back at his, if we go back to previous Senate elections, in 2018, he won by 23. But I mean, this was such a blue wave year, and you could see West Virginia went Democrat. Many of these states went Democrat by, incredibly high numbers. Gillibrand won by 34. Bob Casey won by 13%. Tammy Baldwin won by 10. Numbers that we will be so far from seeing in 2024. So I think that he will lose a significant portion of the vote, but he does still win by a pretty healthy margin. And then we have the state of Virginia. And this race could potentially be close, but two things are really holding the Republicans back here. Number one is that this is a presidential year. In some states, that will help the Republicans, but in a state like Virginia, that is very anti-Trump, staunchly, and very, obviously, apparently, anti-Trump. This will definitely benefit the Democrats here, and also their nominee, or maybe presumptive nominee, I don't know if he's officially the nominee yet, Hung Kao, is a very weak candidate. All his previous experience is running for Congress in 2022, which he lost by a lot. He lost to Jennifer Wexton, the representative, by a lot. So Virginia, I don't think that we, should expect to get very close at all. This might be a little bullish, but I honestly do think that Bob Casey wins by just about 5%. He can't go much further, but that does make it a likely margin win. What could weaken Bob Casey here is the fact that this is being held on the presidential ballot. And I think that in a state like Pennsylvania, that would definitely hurt him and benefit his Republican opponent, Dave McCormick. But still, Bob Casey is a very strong candidate. You could see that with his 13-point win back in 2018. And, Pennsylvania voted for John Fetterman 2 years ago in 2022 by 5%, a margin that really nobody was expecting. It was such a high margin. So I definitely think that Bob Casey can do better than John Fetterman. Moving on now, I believe, that is it for likely Democratic states. There are quite a few likely Republican states. Again, 5 to 15-point margins for the Republicans here. So definitely Nebraska's regular Senate election. Now this one would probably be a shock to a lot of people if it does get pretty close. And I might be overestimating the actual independent candidate in this race a little bit by making it a likely margin win. But we have an incumbent Republican senator, Deb Fischer. Just looking back, she won by 19% back in 2018, and that was in a blue wave year, I'll mind you. But this time around, we actually have an independent named Dan Osborne running against Deb Fischer. And we don't have any Democratic candidates in this race yet. So we can really, it is very likely that the Democrats endorse Dan Osborne in this race. He is a local union leader. He led the workers' strike against Kellogg's. I believe it was last year or 2 years ago. Kind of became a little well known for that. But he is mostly progressive, especially on economic issues, and Democrats are likely to endorse him here. So he is a very strong candidate. He's actually pulling in a lot of money, almost $700,000 so far since his announcement. I mean, which isn't insane, but it's pretty good for Nebraska politics, right? I mean, this is Nebraska. So if he does run a good, strong campaign, I feel that this could go down to a likely margin. All right, I'm going to try to move a little faster here now. Missouri, Josh Hawley wins by a likely margin, but there is a pretty solid Democrat, Lucas Coons, who brings in a lot of money and excitement. So that one's probably a likely margin win. And then Texas, considering, or sorry, no, no. Florida, I think, is likely. Trump won it by 3, or I'm sorry, well, in 2018, Rick Scott, who's running again now, actually flipped this seat, I believe. I'm pretty sure. Let's just check. So Bill Nelson was the incumbent back in 2012, and then he ran for another term in 2018, but Rick Scott beat him, and that was an incredibly close race. Like a lot of people remember this race. It was Rick Scott won by 0.1%, just 0.1. But this time around, with Rubio won by 16 2 years ago. Florida has shifted enormously to the right. I mean, it's absolutely incredible what we have seen in Florida. Nothing like we have seen, in recent history, in recent political history. So Florida does go Republican. That is for certain. I mean, a lot of you will agree with many of these characterizations that I've made so far. But that's it for likely states. So now Republicans are at 49 seats. Democrats are at 43. So Republicans, for an outright majority of 51, need 2 more seats. They need to win 2 more of these remaining seats. And Democrats need to win 8. And there are so Democrats would need to win all of them. So now we move on to what we call lean states. So these states will be decided by a 1 to 5% margin. So very close, and we don't really know for sure as of now how they are going to go. Starting with the Democrats. Maryland. Not a state that we typically see as a close state, anywhere near lean. I mean, back in 2018, Ben Cardin won by 34%. I mean, that's a whole nother. That was more than New York. I mean, 34% is really a whole nother level. Kaine winning by 16 is one thing. 34 is a whole nother thing. And then Biden won this state by something similar in 2020. However, we do have the former governor of Maryland, Larry Hogan, who is a Republican running for this seat. It was a big surprise when he announced, but Larry Hogan, again, was a Republican who served as governor of Maryland. I mean, that really takes something. You can't just be any old Republican to win. He is very moderate, very unifying, very centrist, and it appears that he has the money. The RNC, the Senatorial Committee, is actually putting money into this race, and his fundraising numbers look good as of now. It also depends on who the Democratic nominee is. It's looking really close between Angela Brooks, and who is like a local commissioner or something. Not really sure entirely, and David Trone, who is a U.S. representative from Maryland. Trone is favored to be the nominee. So this race is definitely going to be close, but just because of the partisan lean of Maryland, I don't really know if voters are that bipartisan to elect a Republican to Senate. Governor is one thing, but voters are much more partisan when it comes to Senate, House, and presidential elections. Arizona now. Whoops, not New Mexico. The state of Arizona, I think, will be lean Democrat, and that is, and if not lean for Democrats, it's likely for Democrats. The Republicans, for whatever reason, are running Kari Lake once again. Now, you might recognize that name. She ran for governor 2 years ago in 2022, and lost to a Democrat who didn't even campaign, who didn't even show up for debates, who didn't even spend any money. The Democrat ran a horrible campaign, and she still lost to that Democrat, Katie Hobbs, who is now governor. And Kari Lake still refuses to admit that she lost that election. She will not concede that race. So Kari Lake is an extremely weak candidate, to say the least. And this time around, in 2022, Katie Hobbs won by less than 1%, very narrow margin. But this time around, Kari Lake's opponent in the Senate race is Ruben Gallego, who is a U.S. representative, very likable, young, energetic, who will really get out the vote in Arizona, progressive, and I think that Ruben Gallego will have um, no trouble winning this race. This should be an easy race for him, considering his strength as a candidate, I believe, and his funding, and Kari Lake's weakness as a candidate. Moving on now to this, the state of Wisconsin. Now, this one could be tilt, because Republicans got extremely lucky here with the pretty much presumptive nominee at this point that they got, who is Eric Hovde. That is his name. He is a businessman, and you wouldn't expect him to be very strong, but I mean, his answers on questions make him seem very unifying as a candidate, very moderate and centrist, and someone who would actually get stuff done in Washington. That being said, Tammy Baldwin is an incumbent, and she is a popular incumbent. I mean, she is far popular than the than the other senator from Wisconsin, Ron Johnson, who won by 1% in 2022. You know, he won re-election, and Tammy Baldwin is far more popular than him according to polls. So I think that she would be able to pull this through in the end. We also have the state of Michigan, and it's looking like this race won't be all that close. We have a Democrat incumbent here who is retiring, who is not running again. And it is almost certain that Elissa Slotkin, who is a representative from a swing district in Michigan, will be the nominee for the Democrats. And it's also almost certain, even though he does have, serious contenders, it is looking like a former U.S. Representative, Mike Rogers, will be the Republican nominee. So I think that Slotkin wins. Number one, the state voted for Biden by almost 3% in 2020. It is a leaning Democratic state, just partisan makeup wise. But also, I really doubt that Mike Rogers is a strong candidate at all. And it recently came out that he is a registered voter in the state of Florida. And in 2022 in Pennsylvania, with Dr. Oz being from New Jersey, you see how that is an effective strategy. Fetterman nailed that into people's brains. Was that Dr. Oz was from New Jersey, he wasn't even a Pennsylvanian. Elissa Slotkin has a perfect opportunity to do just that in a state that people in Michigan probably even hate more, the state of Florida. So, Mike Rogers has that, the fact that he's from Florida, but also he's older, he is so boring, and he is so flip-floppy. He almost ran for president, for the Republican nomination for president in 2024, because he wanted to stop Trump. He said he would always go on CBS and CNN and say how the party needed a strong anti-Trump challenger and all this. And now Trump has endorsed Mike Rogers in this race. It's just so insane, all of this. And he is so flip-floppy, and he is just a weak candidate through and through. And then, I guess I was going to put this as tilt, but I guess I would say Jackie Rosen wins by just over a point. Sam Brown, the Republican, isn't anything special as a candidate, and we have a Democratic incumbent here, Jackie Rosen, and even against a very strong candidate, Adam Laxalt, who was thought to be the best candidate that the Republicans put up in 2022 for the Senate races, at least in the swing states. Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Georgia, Arizona, Nevada. Adam Laxalt was thought to be the best, and he still lost. He lost by 0.8%. So I definitely think that in a presidential year, Jackie Rosen would be able to win this race by a lean margin, by more than 1%. And then, lean states for the Republicans. There is only one, that being the state of Texas. I don't think that Ted Cruz will have too much of a hard time winning this. But Colin Allred, the Democrat, is a very likable, very young, very energetic, progressive guy who could, I feel, really replicate in a lot of ways Beto O'Rourke's 2018 performance. They're very similar in a lot of ways. Still, O'Rourke lost and Cruz won by 2.6%. I feel that in a presidential year, I mean that was in a blue wave midterm year, but this time around it's in a presidential year. The presidential election will be held on the same ballot. Texas is a Republican state that will encourage Republican turnout, and Ted Cruz probably wins by more than 2.6%. So that puts Republicans at 50, Democrats at 48. And we have two more states to characterize, Montana and Ohio. Both of these states will be tilt states, so less than a 1% margin. Ohio. Ohio could honestly be lean. I could very well see it being lean. But I think that Sherrod Brown, the Democrat who won by a very healthy 6.8% in 2018, I believe that he will win re-election. And this candidate that the Republicans put up in this race, Bernie Moreno, is maybe the worst you could get. I mean, he is a very extreme on many issues, especially regarding abortion. And even though Ohio is a Republican state, and they voted for Trump by 8, and Trump's endorsement gave Bernie Moreno the nomination, and even though Trump's strong support of Bernie Moreno, and all of Bernie Moreno's policies will benefit him in the rural areas, in the Trump areas, in the urban and suburban areas, Sherrod Brown will be able to run up his numbers. That's how he won in 2018. And I think he will be able to replicate that same exact thing in 2024. I am more confident than I ever have been before that Sherrod Brown wins another term. I really, for the longest time, I did not think that it was possible, but now I do. And then Montana. I gotta be honest with you guys. I think that both Montana and Ohio vote Democratic. I think that Jon Tester holds on in Montana, a state that he won by just 3.6 in 2018, which was a blue wave midterm year, and a state that Trump won by 16.4 in 2020. I think that Jon Tester holds on. And I think that if this Republican nominee, Tim Sheehy, was any more like a normal Republican candidate, even if it was someone like Mike Rogers in Michigan, or Dave McCormick in Pennsylvania, or they'd be really lucky if it was someone like Eric Hovde in Wisconsin, then he would win. But Tim Sheehy has a very interesting background. He has definitely left a big digital footprint, to say the least. And he apparently, I mean, this is apparently like exaggerated, but he was involved with a plane crash that resulted in fatalities in the early 2000s, I think. But in the end, I think that Jon Tester would be able to run a strong enough anti-negative campaign against Tim Sheehy, and that Jon Tester would be able to win. Not to say that Jon Tester consistently polls as one of the most popular U.S. senators, and that is in a heavily Republican state. Jon Tester is a moderate senator who can really unite a state, and I would have faith, if I was Jon Tester, that I would be able to win re-election. He is a very likable, normal-seeming guy, and who really appeals to Montana values. So that puts Democrats at 50, Republicans at 50. And if you have seen my recent 2024 presidential election projections, you'll know that I actually think that Biden is favored to win. I think that Biden wins by winning Michigan, Pennsylvania, and then Arizona. That's the critical one right there, Arizona, and as well as holding on to states like New Hampshire, Minnesota, others, Maine, whatever, and and that would put him at 271 electoral votes, just one more than he needs to win. So that means that I believe that Democrats win control of the Senate. Get that into your mind. I mean, take my prediction as much as you want. Consider that as much as you want. I'm sure many people will disagree with me on this. But in a strange turn of events, I didn't think I would hear myself say this throughout the entire course of this 2024 election. I actually think that Democrats will win the Senate because I believe that Joe Biden will be reelected and Kamala Harris will be that tie-breaking vote. So thank you all for watching this video. Leave a comment. Make sure to subscribe. I would really appreciate that. I hope you all enjoyed, and I will see you all later.